Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this session on fit for purpose data versus AI ready data, the right RWE approach. As real world evidence continues to evolve, one of the biggest questions we face is how to get the data right. On one hand, fit for purpose data is about being relevant to the research question at hand, precise, focused, and actionable. On the other hand, AI ready data is about preparing for scale, building data sets that can power advanced analytics, predictive models, and next generation insights. Both approaches bring value, but they come with trade offs. Relevance versus scalability, depth versus breadth, speed versus long term readiness. In this session, we'll explore these differences, explore how organizations are navigating them. Most importantly, we'll look at what this means for generating evidence that is not only rigorous but also useful in driving smarter decisions and better outcomes for patients. I would now like to start with the introductions. First, to introduce the moderator of this session, Dr. Alessandra Nunes Faria Oortwijn, Global Head of Evidence Generation at Alfasigma SPA. With over 20 years in the pharmaceutical industry and strong foundation in clinical and academic medicine, he brings deep expertise in clinical development, medical education, scientific communication, launch excellence, KOL engagement, and real-world evidence research. Her work spans multiple therapeutic areas with a particular focus on endocrinology and immunology, and she is widely recognized for her strategic vision in advanced evidence-based healthcare globally. I would further like to introduce our speakers as well. Dr. Melinda, Director of Dataset Strategy and Commercialization at PicnicHealth. She brings deep expertise in developing high-quality observational research and AI-powered methods to make complex medical data research-ready. With a PhD from Princeton and postdoctoral training in structural biology and molecular genetics, Melinda has built innovative data pipelines and partnerships that advance translation research, evidence generation, and improved patient outcomes. Furthermore, our next speaker, Dr. Kavita Lamror, a clinical doctor with over 16 years of experience spanning healthcare delivery, big pharma, health tech, and academia. She currently leads RWE and digital transformation at Maxis Clinical Sciences, driving AI-enabled strategies to strengthen evidence generation and optimize product value. Previously, she held leadership roles at Sanofi Novartis, where she advanced RWE and HEOR initiatives, developed flagship RWE products, and built evidence packages supporting regulatory and reimbursement submissions. Dr. Kavita is a strong advocate for using AI and digital innovation to make healthcare more accessible, personalized, and evidence-driven for better patient outcomes. Further, our next panelist, David Gascoigne. He's a CEO of Segmed and also serves as a CEO at Alvin Genomics, driving innovation in genomic discovery through cloud-native platforms. With over 30 years of experience in life sciences and healthcare, David brings deep expertise in big data analytics, operational excellence, and commercialization of products and services. He has held senior leadership roles at Sutherland, GNS Healthcare, IQVIA, Symphony Health, Accenture, IMS Health, and Milward Brown, shaping analytics-driven strategies and building high-performing teams. David's work spans AI, predictive analytics, business transformation, positioning him as a thought leader in leveraging data to accelerate scientific and commercial impact. Wow, that was a great introduction for all of you. I would now like to hand it over to the moderator of the session, Dr. Alessandra, to take over and commence the session.
Thank you so much, Kev. And welcome everybody for this session. It's really a pleasure to be with such a distinct panel, to have a nice discussion around the topic of how we look into fit for purpose data versus the AI-ready data approach and in evidence generation. So today, very briefly, what we aim to do in this session is really to contrast a little bit the pros and cons of the fit for purpose versus AI-ready data. And then we can assess what is the status quo, so what is the current status and what are the key challenges that we face to achieve AI data readiness. And then let's also hopefully at the end of the session give you a nice view and from each of the speakers here on what are the future opportunities that we see in this field. So just to crack on, I would like to pose the first question and to all of you. In your domain, how you would define the differences between the fit for purpose and AI ready data? And maybe we can start from Kavita.
Thanks, Alessandra. Hello, everyone. So I will try to limit my answer to my current use cases so that the other guests can also have their viewpoints here. What we are doing a lot of right now is trying to identify how clinical trials can be made better, and not just identify where we can use RWD for generating real-world evidence for reimbursement submissions. So we use the data, the fit-for-purpose data, for clinical site identification, where we already know that these are the sites that are performing well. You can get your patient pool there. You can meet your requirement for the kind of patients, the specific what we are looking at. The teams, they understand the regulatory pathways, how managing auditability of the data goes, how to transfer the data, how to analyze the data, and so on. So in my field, a part of it is enabling clinical trials, the trial itself, and then we go on and also do the analysis of what we actually do with the data, where if it's either fit for purpose, then we are doing the very specific outcomes we are looking at, or we expand and do the very AI ready, which is more, very specific in nature, and we can put it into the ML algorithms. I'll let the other judges take on from here.
Thank you, Kavita. Maybe Melinda, you can talk a little bit about how it is, this contrast in your domain.
Yes. So, I mean, I'm working mostly in the non-interventional space. And we see fit for purpose and AI ready to really be complementary, not competing with each other, in the sense that AI ready becomes the fit that you're trying to understand how to make the data available for. And really where they overlap the most is transparency on how the data has been collected and how it's been transformed. And so we don't see these two sort of like tasks as conflicting with each other. There's just additional things that we have to do when thinking about if it's AI ready, to look more into bias, additional kinds of bias that maybe we like traditionally hadn't thought about, and also understanding this study population. So in fit for purpose, maybe you have one well-defined target population that you're trying to understand if you're going to be fit for. For AI, I think you start to think about, well, how broadly is it going to be used? What potential models are you looking to develop, and really understanding if it's fit for that, and what those target populations are. And then also we like to make sure that we have mechanisms in place to look at drift over time, because that's you potentially would introduce additional checkpoints when you're initially starting, because you know that it needs to sort of like to persist over time, and that it still be valid. And as we are making like the shift from more traditional only using EHR or using claims data, I think you actually get more possibility of what you're able to do. And so where I'm at PicnicHealth, we actually are using patient-mediated done record retrieval, which gives us a chance to get more data on patients, more long-term data on patients, which I think opens up the possibility of AI that we might want to be able to look at, where you're looking at trends and predicting patterns that happen much longer timescales than what we're maybe used to using when we're just doing then like a claims done data set. So I would just say the most important thing is full documentation and transparency holds true whether it's a single study or being able to prep your data for AI purposes.
Thank you, Melinda. David, would you like to add?
Yeah. So fantastic comments. Hello, everyone. I'll talk with respect to the use case area that I'm in, which is focused on medical imaging and the development of medical imaging data for use in real world evidence and AI applications. There's really 5 points that I look at in the world I'm in. I think they're applicable elsewhere. The first, which is really the primary goal, is historically I see fit for purpose is more around meeting today's immediate business regulatory needs or historical business regulatory needs. We have to do that regardless of whether it's AI ready or otherwise. In contrast, AI ready extends that by enabling long-term AI and machine learning innovation and scalability. So it's the innovation and scalability that AI readiness is bringing to the table. With respect to data quality, fit for purpose, as I see, it's typically clean enough for a specific study or use case. In contrast, AI ready or an extension is really enabling the curated, harmonized, standardized across sources. So it really enables the development of more curated, harmonized, standardized data assets at a scalable basis. The third point is in terms of usability. Typically fit for purposes in the space I've been has been a very specific use case. So it works at narrow applications, such as example, a single study, but then you do another study and you start all over again. AI ready, if developed properly, enables the broader application and enabling the AI training and multimodal integration, which is really important in the space that we're in, because we're trying to tie the imaging data with the clinical data and other data assets as we evolve to enhance the ability to develop real-world evidence use cases. The fourth point, I think I've already touched base on this, is scalability. So again, fit for purpose typically has limited reuse, rework needed for new use cases. AI ready should enable the reuse across multiple studies and therapeutic areas and the development of build of AI pipelines. And then the final point, in my mind, is value creation. So fit for purpose does deliver short-term case-specific outcomes. But again, what we're trying to build with AI-ready data sets is building a data moat that accelerates AI adoption across our stakeholders and customers. So those are some of the differentiators I have, both, again, not competitive, complementary.
Absolutely. Now, and I like the way you pose, David, because I think you kind of frame it a little bit as a trade-offs, right? So I would like to follow up with a question more to the clinician. Kavita, maybe you can comment on what are the advantages that you see when using fit-for-purpose data in clinical or regulatory settings.
Because everything is evidence-based, what we are looking at is the data has been defined for a very specific purpose, and we are expected to follow a certain way of collecting the data, processing it, and then sharing it. So right off the bat, we are looking at something that has been in the system for a while. So there is regulatory acceptance and trust in the way the data has been identified, collected, shared, and analyzed. Now, what happens is, because there is that level of trust and the structure and the process is well defined, it is easier to communicate that to the clinicians and the stakeholders that are not essentially statisticians in the best of manner, but they are historically able to interpret the data, identify the clinical relevance for disease management, and go on and do what they need to do for managing their patients. It also lends itself to this the aspect of auditability, where you're following the ALCOA principles. Just like Melinda and David said, it's the data provenance, what happened to the data where, and because of that transparency, the lack of potential black box nature that can happen in AI-ready data, what you're doing is it's very, very transparent and easy to accept by these bodies. And also then, because we have defined this question, we have budgeted for a study for just those 10, 20, 30 variables. We have defined the primary and secondary outcome measures and the way we collect them, and for the time we collect them. So all said and done, it's a very lean method of doing things. We are looking at saving costs. We are looking at optimizing where and how we are getting the data and how we are sharing the data. And because of that, the scientific integrity and trust on the entire pathway and process is much higher for the fit-for-purpose data. And then it is easier for decision-making, because everything that has happened up to now for this specific fit-for-purpose data that we've collected, and it can be reproduced at later stages, and then we can have follow-up clinical trials after the pivotal trials, and we can go on and have supplementary data from real-world studies and so on and so forth. So in that sense, it really works well to communicate the reports, the outcomes to the doctors and the healthcare providers, and immediately put it into action for the decisions they need to take, or regulators or policymakers or reimbursement bodies.
Super. I think it's you crack really nicely the points. Follow-up question, maybe. Well, what we see very often is that you take your approach with fit for purpose data. You have your transparency and your suitability for regulatory purpose. And there is always the ambition in several environments, a company or academy, that you would like to then reutilize those data, maybe, and try to make it use it in AI models. So I would like to ask Melinda, what are the challenges or limitations that you encounter when you try to reutilize data that is collected for the first purpose, but then in AI?
So for us, I think the biggest challenge we have is the lack of like the metadata that's there to help you kind of understand how that data is collected. So for me, and what experience that I have is we're often thinking about how to use secondary then data in a fit for purpose way. And at least in the US healthcare system, there's broad access to a lot of secondary then data. People have a lot of options, but often that comes in already de-identified. It's already structured in some way to where some of the the transformations of the metadata is missing. And so that then becomes a problem if you want to then reuse that for something else. Particularly as an example, often people forget how so much of unstructured data actually is structured in a way. It's designed in a way in a lot of the electronic health record systems. And so sometimes that can introduce a bias into what you're looking at because of where it came from, where some health systems have very over-engineered EHRs and then others are straight out of the box. And so if you then use that data to then train a model, there are things underneath that you've never seen that are actually influencing what's happening as you start to think about that engineering higher features. And so we find that that is probably one of the biggest hurdles of sort of like you don't know what you don't know and how that data then was how collected. And if you want to be able to reuse something, often you can't, or you're having to start over again, recollecting all those medical charts and things like that. And so that's kind of what it is trying not to cut corners and thinking, oh, it doesn't matter. It's all structured. Like it maybe not. You know, there could be a lot of things that you don't know or things that are missing for a reason that you've sort of glossed over because it wasn't as well-formed and quality as you thought, but then it has an important impact. And so any of those choices you make can be amplified once you then start to apply your model. And so I think it's more about, well, it's important to be scale and move quickly. You still need to treat it as going from the beginning and understanding where the data has come from, what are the needs of your training set, and making sure that you're documenting all those choices that you're making so that you can see how it may influence then your model performance. So I like to sort of see it as there's fit for purpose. And so now we just want to say, what's our new purpose? Well, the purpose is to create a reliable training data set and use that and then go through your checklist of things to thinking about, okay, are we still meeting all of our needs prior to starting?
Thank you. So maybe now I will turn to David, and considering what Melinda just said, I'm really curious if in your career you have really experienced some echo. Sorry. An example where the AI-ready data added really value beyond the traditional. If you could give us an example beyond the traditional evidence generation.
Yeah, and I'll just make it again applicable to the current space. And there's three areas, and I'll go deeper on the third one. There's a lot of companies out there developing foundation models in healthcare, which will ultimately feed in. We're providing a lot of the data assets for the companies who are building and developing the foundation models. So we're leveraging the real, we're getting the data in an AI-ready format to enable that to happen. So without the AI ready, there's no foundation. There's obviously no foundation models, and there's a big demand for companies whether they've worked out how to use the data once they've got foundation models. That's a different that's a different workshop for another time. But the significant play there in the diagnostic area, there's a lot of the companies who are developing diagnostic tools, equipment within imaging departments, and they want AI-ready model to refine and improve their equipment, and ultimately the aim may be to eliminate the need for a radiologist at some stage in the future. But we've morphed into the real-world evidence space, and that's where my personal passion is, and that's where I think the value is as we're moving into the biopharma space. And I've seen a number of situations where, again, I talked about it earlier, it's the ability to bring together data assets which have been traditionally very difficult to do and analyze those over time. And that's bringing together the imaging data with the clinical data, with the lab data, with all other information that's available, and really getting into the development of meaningful patient cohorts, so you can map and measure a patient journey based on the different disease states they're in. Yeah, we've been doing patient journeys for 20, 30 years, but it allows an additional level of sophistication that otherwise wouldn't be there beforehand. And for me, my goal is disease protection and early intervention. And 10 years ago, we were looking at the last 3 months of somebody who got multiple myeloma, and it's whether they're going to survive 3 months or 6 months. Is that important? Absolutely. But what I want to do is get to 20 years in advance. What can we do and how can we leverage the AI models? And that's where I want to go with the work that we're doing. And I think the AI-ready data sets and the supporting techniques enable that to happen.
That is super. I think it's as aspirational as it looks, but it's a very as I see more and more data being generated and more groups and different from academic to industry interested in generating AI ready data, that will certainly be something in the landscape. So looking forwards. I would like to turn one maybe follow-up question, Melinda, because you mentioned in your talk, you mentioned something about scalability. And I would ask you, would you balance the specificity with scalability when you are designing your data?
So I mean, I think in some cases we're producing AI-ready data to be used in an AI model. Then in other cases, we're thinking about where can we leverage AI and technology throughout a study? And that's in a different kind of question. And so for us, it's often about when can we do something that allows us to gain scale? Is there a model, for instance, that can accurately pull out every blood pressure measurement and be able to say that this is a high quality measurement? It fits within, allowable ranges. It has all the right units and things like that. We don't want to use people hours to reading through medical records or reading through EHRs to simply record a blood pressure medicine. And so in that case, we'll use AI and technology when we can to do the things that are easy to identify, knowing that we can layer in quality checks, both programmatic checks and humans to review that it's been captured correctly, and then save our good clinicians for doing things like how progression and done like a tumor. We're not going to train. I mean, we may be able to train a machine in order to see that, but why not use our clinicians who are trained in order to, be able to pull that out and use AI and technology to do the things that are much more easier to see, that are well formed, and that are well captured. And so for us, when we're setting up a study, even a fit for purpose study, we're trying to use technology when we can, so that we can be leaner and be more efficient for our sponsors in order to put efforts where it makes the most sense. And so when we're setting up a study, we're looking at every single endpoint and variable that we're going to collect and really asking, how should we collect it? Should we use technology? Could we use a person? And when do we layer in our quality control, and how? That way, for a really key endpoint that's important to a study, it has 100% review. double abstraction and things like that, but using technology then in other places. And so that's where we have the things of like, when can we get scale and when is it appropriate to think about scale, if that's helpful.
Thank you. So maybe it will be a bit controversial in my next question, because I think you touched an important point. I could see things coming together a little bit as you embedded in your design things that will turn your study more and more AI ready, right? Because you are embedding something. And then I would ask Kavita to comment. So is there any risk that we over-engineer data for AI at the expense of the clinical relevance? So is there any risk for us that we should, in your perspective, be aware of?
Definitely. Everything has to be put in clinical relevance because the end goal is obviously better patient outcomes. So, during the journey of data, irrespective of whether we are, collecting it from clinical or real world sources, what we are looking at is, when we are doing the data validity, we are looking at a lot of whether data is missing, whether data needs to be computed into some other variables, whether we feature engineering. So it's not just the data science team that is looking at, say, the outliers or the missingness and imputing values that are missing. In fact, we should also be very cautious about how we are doing the imputations, whether, say, it is your mean median mode, you're using regression, or you're going ahead and you're using just the last number that the last value that you had. So that's one way that you've already transformed the data. And from then on, when you do the feature engineering, you have to be aware that you're doing causality versus correlation and also the contextualization. So it could be that, a set of patients, a cohort of patients, a particular type of patients gets admitted with a set of features, but the data that you collected was the data that was in the EHRs after their admission. And now you use this data to start predicting whether these patients will come to the hospital or not. So now you have that data. In principle, it performs well on your model, but what you've done is you have used that data for something that was probably a hospital process sheet instead of hospital guideline, instead of an actual patient clinical journey. So things like those, again, whether it's clinically relevant or not, if you're introducing features, you're overfitting your data under the curve, and then it's technologically right, but is it right for the features that you are looking for? And then in that sense, you're looking at, whether, again, if it's a black box data point, there are digital imaging. What you have looked at are obviously David can talk much more about this, but what is happening is you cleaned up the data when you were preparing your model, and it was real. You used the clean images. And then when the images came in from the real world with the patients, everyone doesn't have a clean image. Then will your model be able to identify that or not? Because it was trained and tested on something that was very clean. So there's a bias in the kind of output of the data. So there are pros and cons, and everything has to be put in perspective while you're using the model and how you're using the model, which is why, fit for purpose can be pushed forward to AI ready, but then you have to be cautious about using how, you're making the decisions and where it's coming from.
Fantastic. Really nice. I think it's a nice wrap up of this part, because I would like to maybe move a little bit now that we framed the main contrasts between the two approaches. Maybe we can now go into a little bit deep diving and I try to identify and share with the audience a little bit on barriers to create AI ready data. I think I'll continue with you, Kavita. So where do you see the biggest gaps in the current data infrastructure and quality if you were considering to turn to AI ready?
So right off the bat, we are looking at interoperability. The data lies in silos. Every EHR, not every, but there are many different types of EHR systems. Someone like Epic, a company like Epic recently, passed it. It can kind of have a monopoly. It can kind of streamline everything and then make it standardized. But what we are also looking at is we are not always looking at one system. We are looking at multiple systems. We are not just looking at places where we are going, when we present with the disease, we go to one place, but then we also go on and have specialists working on it, which might be outside of the system that the EHRs were capturing. do we have the temporality of the data? Do we have the longitudinality of the data? So what we are looking at is, it's not just whether, whether the data talks to each other or not, but whether it's even in the same format. And then it goes on to standardization. We are looking at, is it coded similarly? Can these systems recognize these features? Are we looking at the variables in a manner whether it's been medically coded correctly? Those are the things we are looking at. And then we are also trying to identify, whether the data privacy was maintained. We are looking at all the guidelines of HIPAA, GDPR. Did everyone follow the same principles? Was patient consent taken? Was this patient consent more generic in nature? Was it specific to the studies? When we are looking at data transparency and when we are looking at how we are applying this data, we are looking at whether it was meant for the purpose and whether there was bias in collection. If we are looking at geographical data or special communities, whether it's representative. When we take that data and use it for decision making, will it really apply to other subpopulations and cohorts? So there's a bunch of things that we have to look at, and when we are looking at data gaps, and then we have to follow it up with seeing whether there's infrastructure to handle it, not just for like gathering and processing the data, but sharing it for a bigger purpose, while maintaining privacy and the guidelines that we are supposed to follow for patient, in general, privacy and consent.
Thank you. And I can imagine also that this varies across the globe, right? Depending on which geography you were working, operating on, that will be different gaps. Maybe, Melinda, you can just get this in this hook and tell me what are, if this matches those gaps, translate into challenges for you when you were preparing data for AI use.
Yeah, I think there's mainly like three main challenges. One I've mentioned already, in the sense that there's a lot of hidden artifacts within an EHR. One of the most, I would say, struggling or obnoxious one is copy forward of a text from the visit to the visit. So you lose a little bit of the temporality of does the patient really still have that problem that is mentioned, or has it copied forward to the next encounter? And so it's persisting, but not actually relevant. And so in that case, you can't just take data as it comes into you and start cleaning it. You have to have the context of how it came in to be able to sort of say, oh, actually, clinically, this has resolved. It's just copy pasting everything forward, and the patient is not actually experiencing this symptom or condition anymore, or they have been treated, and you need to actually look at what's important for this context of the encounter that you're looking at. Because I think that can definitely influence kind of what you're doing as you're going through the challenge of making that initial ground truth of what's happening. Additionally, challenges are that underrepresentation of certain populations in a data set will only be amplified as you then move it to the next stage of then potentially building an AI model. And so you really have to think about representation a bit, a lot more intentional to make sure you have the right patients in your data set. And if you need to find additional ways to find and consent patients that are more representative, it's worth the effort of doing that, because you essentially may not know how that model is going to be used later on. And you want to make sure that you've accounted for the diversity of patient population, of their condition, and what you're trying to do, particularly even if you're looking at mild, moderate, and severe patients, but you've concentrated on specialists who only see how severe patients. You're going to have a hard time of predicting what's happening in a mild patient. So you really need to make sure, as far as what you want to use that model for, and make sure that the data that you're using is really going to be representative across a variety of axes. And then lastly, I think the thing that we challenge with most is understanding what is the ground truth. The whole point of the training set is you have to have a true thing and then predicting an outcome, and that has to be present in that training set. And so that can be a challenge when you think about more clinical trial endpoints that are just not done in community care, but really it's your goal to be able to treat everyone. And so one of the things we struggle with is understanding how to get enough volume of ground truth. and thinking about new innovative ways to leverage that ground truth, whether it's stepping outside of our normal comfort zone of just saying we're going to link more and more data together of EHR data, thinking about, okay, how else can we acquire ground truth things? Maybe we can leverage telehealth to get new sets of of these assessments, and reach more communities to get sort of like that. Yes, this is what the clinical assessment looks like. So we've been trying to think about ways in which we can meet patients where they are to get their consent to participate in studies and get their data in order to have more representative than data sets that can go into actually our training models.
Yeah, I like the way that this panel is looking into the challenges and trying to find solutions. And I think it brings me to a question that is potentially relevant for this context. When we try to find solution, and Melinda mentioned telehealth and other aspects, maybe David, you can comment. Are there regulatory or ethical constraints when you try to generate, in our ability to generate AI readiness data? So is anything that comes to mind?
Yeah. The main one we have to address, which is the same for us all here, but PHI is huge, and we have less of an issue on the clinical side because we get the data that's already being screened and cleaned by systems such as Melinda, where Melinda works. But on the imaging data, where we got full responsibility, for those who've worked in the space, there's handwritten. It's not just computer structured. It's handwritten annotations that docs put on images, and so PHI can be rife. So 5 years ago it was all manual. So we had clinicians going through every image, and each patient can have multiple images, and manually going through, which was both painful, not a good use of time, and also prone for errors. So obviously over time that we've developed and we've leveraged AI to get the data AI ready. And so we have a multi-screen process. So we've got 2 different AI algorithms that cleans up and clears all that data. And then we also have sampling methodologies as well. So that's the big area that operationally we have to really address, and we cannot fail, and none of us can fail on PHI and GDPR. The other issue is less of a regulatory issue, and it's more the connectivity issue, because as again you start matching images that we have with claims data, and it's the overlap and then the encryption that you have to do because you constantly have to keep in the identifications of the patient de-identified. So that's obviously a complexity, and as you start connecting the data, you get lots of dropouts and things, so your samples can get a little thin quickly as you bolt on more data assets. And as you bolt on more data assets, there's more risks that become involved. So that's the main thing from my perspective.
No, good. I think it's you say the barriers would be most of the regulatory side. So that's a good. I think something that we certainly will overcome as more discussions occur within the parties. Maybe just a question: if there is anyone would like to add, if there is any specific data type that are particularly difficult to make AI ready, or that you would like to comment.
I think it's not a particular data type, but the previous role I had was specializing in genomics, and this is imaging, and it's the sheer size of the data assets that we're working with, because one patient's genomic data can fill an old-style computer up, and so as data is becoming more readily available, and it's going to continue to grow, and it's the sheer processing that's required to analyze and store the data. And I think the genomic data and the imaging data in particular create huge size data files, so it becomes a storage and the cost of processing issue.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with that. I know we're getting more and more requests to work with wearable data. and the amount of sheer volume that a Fitbit and Apple Watch contain, because they're just always on. It's just a lot of data. Unfortunately, a lot of that data is not usable or not useful for the scientific question. So it takes a lot of us really understanding, like, what is the science that we're trying to answer to figure out which of this data we actually want to work with. But the sheer volume of it is immense.
Yeah.
I mean, we're thinking about step counting for an entire year following up with a patient. I mean, it's just a lot, lots of volume of data.
Yeah, and we got into the process of getting smarter in terms of what a customer really wants, because they might want 1 million images, but if it's an epidemiology study, the metadata is perfectly fine. You don't need you don't need the physical image where all the cost is. Whereas 2 years ago we just still give everything, and if it's somebody who built the foundation model, they do need the raw data. So again, I think being smarter in terms of what we extract, what we give to the customers, because the processing is really, really expensive, and the storage is really expensive.
So before we move into a little bit of the next chapter, look into the future, I just would like to hear from you, because I see that we have raised here several challenges, and they are not solved by one function, and we cannot go alone and solve all this infrastructure, the gaps, or the assumptions that we make, or the regulatory burdens. So as far as your own experience, are there enough cross-functional discussions out there and groups that are trying to crack really those challenges and make this a little bit more approachable in the future?
So I'll take that one. So we all have face teams. We try to license data, and then for every therapy area, we try to get all teams on board when we are sitting in the integrated evidence development plan or the integrated evidence generation plan. What we are trying to do is get as many stakeholders on board. And for every type of stakeholder, we identify the business case and the use cases they'll have, whether it is, the clinical, the exploratory, the commercial, the PV. And then for each one of those, we try to identify what would be the best data model for them. And even within that data model, what are the variables they would be looking at? Like, do we just work off the data model that we get, say a standard OMOP or a version 6, or we add like more parent-child relationships? And for each of those, then we have role-based access where, say the commercial team will get this much. If we want to expose it to the outside, to the HCPs, then do we get the GXP regulatory stuff, in alignment? Do we have the compliance team working on it, and they allow for certain kind of use cases? So essentially, if we start up front and then plan to license the data and then expand its use and look at the data from a perspective of an investment, it will be good. And it can be fit for purpose, but also AI ready over a period of time, instead of just like doing it per study where it can cost anywhere between, say, 500,000 to $1 million, and then just like have the whole therapy area team sit on it and work on it. So that would be a nice thing if everyone sits together and decides on use case at the get-go.
I see that Shekhar is back. So are we over time, Shekhar?
You're on time. I hope everybody's answered your questions as well.
Yes. I would maybe like to have a statement about the future looking from the team, but for the panel here. But if we maybe we can get the questions from the audience if you have some. If not, we can have the statement. We have one question popping up here. What would you say to healthcare organizations that are hesitant to invest in AI-ready data infrastructure? How can they measure the return of investment of making their data AI-ready for real-world evidence? Who would like to take this one? Go ahead.
I'll start off and tag on whoever wants. So we have to look at the return on investment, not just in terms of economic returns, but also efficiency returns. So it's money made and money saved. We have to look at it from that perspective, which is, as I said earlier in my example, if we are licensing or we are the owners of a particular set of data, and those variables they have to be, we have to digitize, we have to identify the use cases, we have to ask the commercial team, say, if you had to go outside and collect this set of data points, how much would it cost you? And if then you merged it with the other teams and all of you invested together, what would be the per team investment on it? And that is one way of looking at it. The other way would be if you ask the R&D team that, when you're doing all these specific, the protein interactions, the drug target interactions, all of those, if you go and get the PKPD data then, and we are using a bigger data set, like the prime kg data set, are we making it easier to generate hypotheses, to test them, to test the causalities? So it's not just that we are saving, saving money, but what we are also doing is saving time, and time converted into money is actually reducing your cost of $2 billion per molecule going into the market. And from that perspective, it's not just the monetary value that you're looking at, but also you're encouraging your team to think bigger, to think as one cohesive team that is looking at the product from end to end, instead of looking at, this is just my role, I push it off to the phase 2, I push it off to phase 3, push it off to phase 4. So in that sense, the comprehensiveness of the ROI, the tangible ROI, will be different for every team. And for that very reason, we have to be there. Besides the fact that everyone is getting on the AI bandwagon, and we should be there if we want to be in the game and be future ready.
Yeah, I like the way you pose it, Kavita. I see similarly. I think that when we look at return of investment, is also how much you're able to accelerate a program, how much you have learnings from one study that you actually apply to other, because then you get smarter and you get more to the point and are able to do studies more efficiently. So those things are very often not really accounted for. So maybe David, I'm looking in the future, and based on your thorough experience in this field, I would be interested to know if you would like to point to us which innovations you see. Also, leaving a little bit the panel with a message of a future looking, as you alluded to. What are the innovations that you expect are to help us to bring this in the future, accelerating the progress of AI data readiness?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's a continuous integration of these data assets, and it just becomes so much more. It just becomes so much more value, and some of that may occur in certain therapeutic areas. So oncology is big, important. Neurology is, super important. I mean, all areas are important, but I think you'll see some developments in specific therapeutic areas as well. But for me, it's a connectivity, and then more importantly, it's then developing the applications and the tools that sit on top of these big data assets. Because again, it's no good. I mean, that's why we're evolving into a real world evidence company as opposed to just a data company, because it's the insights and the value, and we have to make it as easy and accessible for the stakeholders to extract and use and get meaningful insights. And not even once you've got the data, then take 2 years to do a business case. AI is obviously helping in things like biomarker discover, but it can be simple. It doesn't have to be super complex analytics. It's useful, meaningful insights to extract value out of the data that we're providing.
Thank you.
I'm sorry to interrupt. We'll have a hard stop, but I would love to keep this conversation going. What we'll do is maybe with any more questions that we've received from the audience, we'll share it across with you, and you can help us answer those offline, and maybe we can post them on our LinkedIn. But I think so. Noted for next year, we'll have a longer session with this amazing panel.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I maybe just as a closure, I think I would like to thank the organizers for this nice topic. I think there is really, we are moving to a world that data is generated at a so high speed and everywhere. So we have wearables, we have so many other things. So AI data approach is there to stay. It will grow over time. So I'm very happy that we at least could shed some light on the challenges and the opportunities that we see for that. So thank you so much, and thanks for the panel for the very nice discussions.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Yeah.